Hello, welcome to another episode of Calm in the Chaos. It's February 2026, the month of love, but I want to say the month of loving self care from a mental health perspective.
Oh,
Yes. And I'm Michele Badie. I'm a program manager and the champion of Keep Your Stride.
and I am Valerie Carmel, licensed mental health therapist.
We want to start with some kudos, well, more so gratefulness for the love that the Project Management Institute has shown us.
Yay.
Yesterday, our episode has our episode for Projectified podcast went live, and we talked about mental health and protecting our mental health. And you can listen to the episode on any platform. Not any platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
Definitely. We'll make sure to include that link whenever you guys are watching the replay so you'll have access in case you are interested in hearing and seeing our projectified episode. It was pretty good, if I say so myself. A little biased, but
Yes.
definitely
The
got some.
episode is called Preventing Burnout, Proactive Tips for Project Professionals. And just thank you to the Projectify team and to Project
Absolutely.
Management Institute for the opportunity to share what I deem an essential conversation that's needed to take place on a regular basis, normalizing our mental health and how we protect our mental health while we navigate the projects that we manage and execute.
Absolutely. So thank you again to Projectified and Project Management Institute for, reaching out and wanting to work with us. Pretty big deal. So definitely appreciative for the opportunities that are coming our way.
For sure. So today's episode, or this month's episode, depending on when if you're tuning in live or you're catching the replay. So our focus for this month is continuing the narrative of the art of done. And Val, you want to share more about the art of done?
Absolutely. So, Art of Done is our approach to really encouraging project management professionals to be intentional about their sign off and effectively owning your sign off. And that is all about transitioning from the busy, chaotic, sometimes challenging elements of the day into a state of intentional recovery so that we have the ability to sustain ourselves and sustain the excellence of the performance that we're able to provide to not just our employers, but our stakeholders and effectively the people that we serve.
For sure. So this month, we're continuing that narrative. And throughout this year, we're championing the art of done and what that looks like. And we're little like tentacles. There's always going to be this part, that part. There's always going to come up with what that looks like. It's not cookie cutter. It's unique to each one of us as project management professionals. And we just have to help curate what does that look like, right? So for this month, we want to talk about the invisible impact when absorbing stress becomes identity. So what does that look like? Reframing recovery from a leadership perspective, explaining what happens psychologically when stress is absorbed but not released. And we want to normalize the invisible emotional labor that project managers encounter. Val?
Yeah, I think as we are really beginning to get deeper into the intentional practice of taking better care of ourselves as professionals, the art of done as well as the today's episode for the invisible impact really come hand in hand in really providing every one of our listeners with really practical tools and some background information as to why some of the things that we're going to be talking about can be implemented, applied, and hopefully really embraced moving forward to ensure that we are not only just taking care of everybody else, but also taking care of ourselves.
For sure. So, project and program managers, we are often praised for staying calm under pressure. I always refer to us as ducks, gliding across the
Mhm.
water, and underneath those feet are pedaling away.
Definitely.
So, for sure. So we have to figure out what happens when holding it together becomes the norm and the body never stands down.
Definitely. So let's talk a little bit about what does that, how maybe that strength can sometimes become a little bit of a hidden burden. And when
Now,
we, yes,
we're shock absorbers. Is that a strength? Is being a shock absorber a strength? From a clinical perspective, is
it
being a
can
shock absorber a strength?
it can be, because I feel like in a lot of ways so are therapists, right? So there is a, a time and a place where that activity can be absolutely beneficial, right? But just like anytime there is a good thing, too much of a good thing is usually not so much of a good thing. So I think it's about trying to curate a little bit better synergy and balance between those moments where we are in the position of trying to absorb some of the stress and shock of the roles that we play, and then being intentional about kind of channeling that excess and excess stress that we have taken on from others into a place where we can release it and fully come back to a place where internally from a nervous system standpoint that we're able to be in a more regulated space. So it's good in doses, not good all the time.
So what does that look like from a project management perspective? For me, what comes to mind is execution.
Mm,
When you're in the stand-ups, emotions can be high or there's a lot of ambiguity going on, and stakeholders can get frustrated with not having answers or maybe having too much data and they're trying to decipher it to like what does this need to be.
mm,
And I definitely perceive project management professionals being what you said, the buffer, right? Being the buffer, adding value, adding clarity, regulating any type of tension, like entering the chat with pause, recalibrating the room. It's up to us to recalibrate the room. Our energy is matched. But I think kindness
oh,
really is a strong, I would say, the backbone of how being a shock absorber affects you, right? Because you can deliver messages kindly. Because if your tone is what some might say off the charts, then you're ushering yourself to receive an off the chart response.
absolutely.
So if you're kind, beyond respectful, then you're letting that shock absorber vibration not be as intense.
Yeah. Kind of like shocks on a car, right? Yeah, the road might be a little bit bumpy, but if you got great shocks, then it doesn't feel as difficult and as intense on the day to day. So,
For
um,
sure.
so definitely understand that. Are there, do you feel like there are particular periods and times where this shows up more readily, right, for a project manager, for project managers throughout the day?
I think it's just something we encounter every day, which when you brought up the whole piece about our identity, or we collectively talked about identity, I think that's something that, because there's so many narratives around mental health and a safe workplace, a healthy workplace, I think the identity piece of being a shock absorber is being challenged, because
Mm,
a lot of people, from my perception, they want to be known as strong, but do they want to be known as the strong one? I think there's a bit of a difference being known as strong versus the strong one, the one that carries, if it's a burden or a heavy task, however you want to define it to your situation.
mm,
Take it to Sue, she's going to take it. Take it to Malcolm, he's going to do it. Take it to Steve, like he got this. So it's like, do I want to be the go-to person? How do we navigate the conversations and the processes of communication, the past, the communication, the process. How do we need to curate that to be more of a team effort? How to support, make the messaging clear in a different way, possibly that one person is not the one all be all. What's the old saying? One monkey don't stop the show.
Show. Yes, yes, yes.
Like one team player is not, if it falls apart, it's not gonna fall apart. But also, it's not gonna be on one person. The team's waiting for one person to give them the definitive answer. They know how to navigate leadership. So I want to challenge everyone who works in project management. How do you communicate challenges? How do you communicate that a call to action for support? How do you make it a regular cadence versus a one-off situation? And this is something that it's not new, but I do believe that as project management professionals, we're always encountering something we haven't encountered before, even though it could be a same process. The outcome could be different. The stakeholder could be different. The budget could be different. The expectation could be different. And so that makes something that I've done this X amount of years, but this is a unique instance, as many say, an isolated instance of how would you handle that? And so there comes in the shock absorber piece, and you can lean on your processes. So I'm just really interested for the reflection around that. And as a therapist, what do you find when it comes to building an environment that supports you not having to take on all that?
One, I think the element of that in particular is really on the individual, right? There's an aspect of that we are absolutely in control of. And that has to do with the way that we respond to when those asks come about, right? I think at times in the beginning, there might be a little bit of, I don't know, some flattery. You might feel validated, appreciated for this particular ability that you have to show up in spaces that even in the midst of chaos, you're able to appear calm, right? And while that is definitely a strength, and while that is oftentimes something really appreciated by, your teammates and other people around you, it's also important to create a balance between that, to recognize that this is one aspect of what you bring to the table, but is not the primary aspect. And I think being able to keep that in its right perspective can allow you to not kind of lean so heavily into this one version or one aspect of your strengths. So that, from that standpoint, requires some intentional kind of responses in those moments. But also, if you are in the position where you're maybe the project manager specifically on a team, and maybe you're not always the one that is the go-to person for certain things, to also not kind of give that off to other people, right? So if you are recognizing that it can be very daunting for you to take on being the one, end all be all in a particular experience, you also don't want to push that off on your other team members as well. So I think, one, being able to really kind of cultivate a collaborative environment where everyone recognizes that they have some level of skill set and ability to show up in those spaces, but also not, and maybe there may be different, what's the word I'm looking for here? Levels of expertise in that particular skill set. You don't want to always give that to the person who maybe is at the top of it, because ultimately, one, you risk the potential of kind of burning that person out from a sense of just like always having to be the one who handles this thing. But also, you're not really building leadership in your other team members by really kind of thwarting some opportunities that they may have to really kind of build themselves up in that skill set as well. So it's better to kind of spread the wealth a little bit rather than kind of always letting one person be the go-to. Because oftentimes when that happens, it can be, it creates some oftentimes tension, not just for the individual taking that on, but also within the team as well. So it's best to kind of spread that around and allow people the opportunities to build up that skill set.
So, can we expound upon this narrative a little more? And let me ask you this, Val. What does external composure, how does it not equal internal regulation?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So, I think to the previous analogy about the duck, right? On the outside, it looks very calm and peaceful. But there might be a whole lot of other things going on beneath that surface. And so, one of the things that people, um, the external may not necessarily recognize if they're just looking at your, physical kind of like bodily cues or body language, is that they may not recognize how much effort it's actually taking internally to kind of rein all of that in. That is a lot of external energy that is being internal energy rather that is being utilized to kind of manage that and kind of creates a little bit of that mask on the outside. And it's work to keep that mask up. So not allowing people that period of time to then decompress and be able to have time to take that mask off, you're actually just kind of reinforcing more and more of the energy usage of them having to keep that mask up, keep that fence up of keeping all of those emotions kind of bottled in. It's kind of like thinking about if you shake a soda can, right? You keep shaking it. When you finally open it up, it's like making a big mess and going everywhere. The same I find is often true with our own emotions and the efforts that we're trying to take of kind of reining everything in and keeping it on the outside looking really, really nice and pristine. But on the inside, I mean, you could be holding it together with like shoestring and gum and just hoping hoping for the wing and a prayer trying to keep it together. So we want to make sure that people are giving themselves that time to fully kind of decompress, process that, and really shift that energy outside of their bodies so they're not effectively holding on to it and carrying it moving forward. So just because it looks pretty on the outside does not always mean that on the inside it's just as pretty. Sometimes it's a little bit messy on the internal for, oftentimes with good reason, right? We don't necessarily in certain instances want that to be something that is conveyed, but we do need to be sure that we're giving ourselves time later on to kind of release that in maybe a setting that feels more appropriate, whether that is, later on in your own office, maybe talking to, a trusted colleague who can, be supportive in that moment. Those are all, appropriate ways to be able to kind of give ourselves maintaining that certain level of professionalism forward, but also still maintaining our own sense of humanity outside of those moments.
For sure. And it, as I'm listening to you, one thing that is continually coming to mind, how project program management professionals, we feel responsible for stabilizing everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And, another thing, it shows up as cynicism. It can show up as short tempered. But one thing that I think that does not always come up is impatience. Impatient with self.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's a certain level of when we are stressed, right? Our body naturally wants to mobilize. It wants to do a thing, right? And so when you're feeling, antsy and restless, that's going to translate in the way that you communicate, body language as well as oftentimes tone, and that can come across as a level of impatience. And so those are really great signs to kind of look for yourself if you are trying to determine, am I actually as calm as I am actively portraying on the outside? Because when you are really, really regulated, you're not experiencing a lot of those, symptoms that you're mentioning, the restlessness, the cynicism, the impatience. Those are all things that will continue to that really shine through, that are related specifically to you being elevated.
I want to stress impatience with self, because we can demonstrate being patient with other people, We can restructure delivery of an ask, but with ourselves, the impatient level is low. And I
Oh,
think that's something that we have to create a self awareness of and figure out what a contention plan can be. And I mean, I know that we frequently say take a pause. And I also, and we've talked about, communication, you know, setting up different channels of communication for support. And I also want to just include the intentionality of self awareness, of regulating yourself, assessing what made the eyebrows go up, what made you sigh, as being the shock absorber, being someone that's absorbing the tension of others. How does that impact you? And are there techniques that one can think of from a clinical perspective to help with self awareness, specifically self awareness in a tension environment?
yeah, definitely. I think the best thing is really just the being intentional about creating periods of time to actually check in with yourself. I definitely, when I'm working with patients, one of the first assignments I have anybody do is like track their mood. And while they're tracking their mood for, overall for a day, what you actually end up doing is kind of noticing all the ways that your mood has transitioned throughout the day, right? Our feelings are temporal by nature, so it's not, you could feel excited at 9:05 and then at 9:15 now you're frustrated. So it's about recognizing, oh, that there was this shift that I experienced and what was the catalyst to that shift. Those intentional moments, and it doesn't have to be, this very long drawn out practice, but just being intentional at, whether that's at the middle of the day, maybe if that's at the end of the day, to just say, okay, how did I feel throughout the day and why did I feel that way? It's a simple 2-part little activity. How did I feel overall today and what contributed to it? Over time, you'll start to notice if there are any particular patterns or things that have been consistent in the way that you're showing up. We can address things that we cannot acknowledge. So, taking the time to really practice that level of self awareness, to recognize what those challenges may or may not be, is going to be the first step in order for you to have some control and agency about how you show up and what changes, if any, you need to take on and really implement.
For sure. Can we talk about leadership costs from
Oh,
being a shock absorber?
yes, ma'am. um,
There's
one
a
of the big,
cost.
yes, absolutely, because there's a cost for everything, right? Anything that we take on, it's effectively replacing something else. We had to make space for that by eliminating something else. And so when we are being asked to consistently absorb the stress and shock from so many other people, you effectively are kind of drowning out your own cues because you're trying to now make space for things related to everyone else. And one of the things how that can really impact leadership is that you're going to experience some cognitive overload, right? There's only so many decisions, tasks, fires you're able to set out, to put out in a day before your brain is like, okay, we have done a lot. And
Yeah.
so some of the things that we can really experience is lapses in memory. That is definitely impacted. Typically, the more elevated we become, the part of our brain that handles all of that higher level cognitive work, so like problem solving, innovation, creativity, memory, learning consolidation. So if you're trying to learn new tasks, skills, all of those things get basically shrunken. That part of your brain kind of like low key shrinks in order to in order to shift the energy towards your body's ability to respond to the stress. That's why oftentimes when people have been, gone through maybe a really intense project for like several weeks and it's been really, really stressful, over time you may notice that your memory starts to starts to dwindle. You may notice that your irritability starts to kind of increase. That impatience with yourself may get more frustrated. You may notice you're making more mistakes, right? And all of those things are going to impact the way that you interact and show up for everyone else, as well as how you're treating yourself. So that ability to recognize that taking on that role temporarily may be necessary for depending on the situation that you're in, but doing that consistently over time without recovery is actually going to create some negative impact to your overall performance, right? There is definitely a level of stress that can be helpful, right? So let's use the example of weightlifting as an example, right? If you are trying to build muscle, right, maybe going from 20 pounds to 25 pounds will challenge you enough to cause your body to build some muscle and kind of respond. But if you went from 20 pounds to 200 pounds, you would cause some serious damage to your body. We wouldn't
Mhm.
expect you to do that. Most people wouldn't consider to think of doing that in the gym because they recognize how that's going to impact their body. Well, the same is true from a mental standpoint, from a cognitive standpoint. If you are constantly experiencing lots and lots of stress, there's a point where stress no longer becomes as a kind of like catalyst and a driver to you performing well. At some point it kind of does begin to taper off. It's called the Yerkes-Dodson law, in which there is a particular threshold of stress that no longer becomes supportive and effective. It becomes detrimental to you. So those are all things to kind of consider when you're thinking about how much you are taking on. It's going to eventually come at a cost, and you have to be intentional about that, right? We see that in lots of other ways in our lives, right? Debt, right? I'll swipe now, but at some point you got to pay that back. And so that can be a really difficult way to constantly be in that cycle of I'm full and now I'm empty. And then we got to dig ourselves out of that hole. And now I'm full again. And now you're taking on all this, even more things. And now we're empty. So it can really create a lot of just mental wear and tear, not just on our cognitive abilities, but also our physical abilities as well.
So,
So, really,
listening to you, what comes to mind about the leadership cost of being a shock absorber is the quality of your ability to build relationships.
absolutely.
And that's important for us, project management, program management professionals. We are always in a space of building relationships,
Mm-hmm.
not only up but across.
Cross.
You know, within, if you work in a PMO, within your PMO, you're building relationships that are rooted in trust because you want to trust your team. And then if you're not working in PMO, but you're working with someone and a business partner, um, you need to build trust and
Mm-hmm.
you need to build, and people want to know who they're working with. So from listening to what you just shared, something that comes to mind to me is the quality of the conversations that you're having. Are you testy? Are you noticing what's happening with someone? Because we observe each other. And I always like to use the analogy of the flashlight. We are the ones that shine the flashlight into the dark spaces to see what's going on. But that also goes with the people that we work with. We are always giving them feedback. You know, we are accountability. But that, just from what you shared, which I think was so eloquent, is the whole piece of relationship building the quality of your relationship building, tongue tied, relationship building can be impacted by us not always being aware of how much of a shock absorber we are and the impact of being a shock absorber. Because people are okay with it, but to your
Mm-hmm.
point, over time it can take a toll, which goes back to the self-awareness piece.
Absolutely.
So one thing that we've talked about all these other things, but I also want to talk about the shock absorbing to a deficit can impact the quality of your business relationships And of course, we know it can trickle over into your home life, right? It can trickle over into your home life, but it can also impact, to your point, your performance, which is rooted in your ability to curate conversations. But you need people to trust you, to able to say things they might not be comfortable saying because maybe they have not accomplished it at that time, or they don't want something put out that might not look favorable, and you have to be someone that they trust to present in a way that doesn't throw them under the bus.
Absolutely. And in addition to the relationship building, I think the other thing that's really impactful specifically for project managers is your problem solving ability goes down.
For sure.
And by nature, project managers are problem solvers. You come with them with a situation, and they thrive on being able to create creative ways of managing issues that come their way. And so when you are constantly allowing yourself to be a shock absorber without being intentional of in creating recovery for yourself, not only is it going to impact your ability to build relationships vertically and horizontally, but also the thing that you really need on the day to day, your ability to problem solve, is also going to effectively be impacted as well. And nobody wants that. None of us want
Mm-hmm.
that. So I definitely think that as we continue to really look at the ways that we can show up for ourselves in particular, is how do you recognize for yourself, right, that that level of composure doesn't necessarily always equal that you've officially recovered um, from, even outside of work. So now laptops are closed and we're done with that. But how do we kind of recognize that that intentional composure during the day isn't going to necessarily look like recovery later on?
I think that's where the art of done and what we're championing shows up. Intent Defining what intentionality looks like for you each day is key. So if that means you're intentionally keeping your conversations at a low vibration because that's what's needed, less conversation because you can sense that the team or the project that you're working on, there's a lot going on and they might be talked out, or they might need a break of, can this meeting be an email, right? People, it's a meme that goes around a lot, but it's something that's very important. They value when a meeting can be an email or a team, something that can happen in a team or Slack
Mm-hmm.
or Teams chat. And so that's intentionality in navigating communication, which can help you turn off and not be the shock absorber, because the last thing you want to do is show up to a meeting that could have been an email and someone's like, I gave that information, or whatever the case may be. And there's different narratives that can fill in the blank. That's just something that just immediately came to mind. But you're like, you're right, this could have been an email. When someone privately messaged you, said, oh, do we need this today? Can we do this? Can we take a pause? Pay attention to the ask. That's intentionality. Pay attention to the ask. I like to do a lot of pre-work before a meeting. Most people do. They send their agendas, their pre-reads, all the things. That's just the
Mm-hmm.
standard for a lot of project management professionals, is to do your pre-read and do the work in advance. So when you show up, you maximize the time. But one thing I've experienced is sometimes the pre-read is so quality, you don't need the meeting. Now, if you're preparing for a weekly meeting for weekly status for executives, that's fine. And but it shortens that meeting time, so you're able to give time back to the team. So there's quality in preparation. I think that's key.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a part of the intentionality, what you're referencing, right? The intentionality, preparation, reading the room, reading the chat. What does that mean? What can you do? Because not only are you saving the team, but you could be saving yourself,
Well,
right? In
absolutely.
that process. So even though we're always thinking of others, and how to work well with them and make sure everyone's playing nicely together, you're also saving yourself, because when you go home, whatever home is for you, whatever your downtime, your personal time looks for you, you want to be all into that.
Mm.
And I think just with how so much narratives have changed around self-care in the past 5 years, well, it's almost 10, since COVID, there's been a rise, right? And it's before then and everything, but it heightened during that time period.
Definitely.
And it's continued on. It's a reminder that we don't forget, but it's an ongoing work in progress on how we address it, to find that balance, to ensure that we're not we're not on life support at work.
Definitely, definitely. It's like, it's important, when you're on the plane, right? You got to put your mask on first before you try to help everybody else. And that is the benefit of really being intentional with your own needs and preferences surrounding how you create recovery for yourself. The good thing is that with that improved kind of self-awareness and being able to check in with yourself, you can make iterations to maybe a ritual or a plan that maybe was once working, but maybe you're noticing it just no longer fits, right? So if you're now working in a different environment, different team, maybe you relocated from one side of the country to another, and now time zones are different, and maybe the times that you're getting communications have also changed as a result. Those are things that may require for you to tweak the way that you have been kind of implementing your art of done and your way of signing off. It's okay to change that. There's nothing that says what worked when you were 5 it's going to work when you're 15. It's okay to change that up as you evolve. But I think continuing to practice the intentionality of checking in with yourself, being honest with yourself about how much capacity you may have at any given time is going to be important in your ability to not absorb as much of the shock. And if you do have to, because of, sometimes things happen in life, then you can be intentional about how you bring yourself from that very heightened state of stress back to a place where you're feeling a lot more calm and regulated.
So, in a closing question, I just want to ask, and I want to make this connection to the art of done. How does practicing daily closure change leadership sustainability from an art of done perspective?
Well, one of the things that it really does is that it helps you kind of close out that the mental tabs that are still kind of running in the background of your mind. And there's a particular reason why that happens. Our brains actually are designed to really remember more of the things that are pending rather than the things that we have completed, right? We tend to, once we've checked that off the list, after that, our brains no longer need to kind of retain that information. But the stuff that's still pending, our brain's going to continue to keep reminding us of that in the background. And what that does is that it's still essentially using up a lot of cognitive energy, whether you recognize it or not. And so the benefit of utilizing Art of Done in kind of closing out some of those mental loops actually allows your brain to recognize, okay, these things that are still pending, well, I'm aware of those things, but I don't need to kind of continue to hold them in my own brain to keep them going. So you can actually kind of power down a little bit and not have so many mental tabs still running in the background. And whether that is by you maybe at the end of the day writing some things down about what you completed or maybe where you want to start the next day. So if there were still tasks that were pending, just write them down. The brain understands that now that they're written someplace, it doesn't have to continue to hold on to it because at that point there's a plan for it. We know that it's something that we need to do and it's in front of us. then your brain can kind of let it go to help allow you from a cognitive space to have more capacity to kind of resume for the next day, but also rest and recover a lot more effectively. One of the Nothing is worse than falling asleep from exhaustion and then waking up at 3 a.m. and your brain turns on and it's like, oh, I needed to do this and I needed to do that. And now you've interrupted your wonderful sleep with 37 things that you effectively need to do but can't do because it's like 4 a.m. Like that might not be the best way for you to get your beauty rest. So being intentional of really kind of closing those things out allows you to fully recover so that you are ready the next day, feeling fully resourced, you feel ready for the day, and you have the capacity to shine and to do what you do best.
I'm a huge list advocate. So when you were just sharing that, I have increased since we have been brainstorming before we launched the Art of Done the end of last year. I'm a journaler. I love to journal. I'm someone, there's a joke amongst journalers, you're always buying pens and paper. Like one thing we're always buying is pen and
Always.
paper, fancy pens, all the things, which is beautiful, right? But at the same time, since we've launched the Art of Done, I find myself after each conversation, highlight, takeaway, lesson, and what's next, if anything, right? Like I'll make these little notes throughout the day, and if you're a journaler, sometimes you're a doodler too, right?
In the
So you have
margin.
these things. But what I've found as I go through this process of figuring this out, as far as practicing the Art of Done with the intentional sign off, because we have to practice what we encourage others to do. It's also turned into like my own, you are one of the win board, but it also makes me think of my wins. So by the end of the week, I'm like, my reflection is becoming different. It's not just, did I get this task done, but it's also the impact my week has made on me and my perception, what my impact has made on others through
That's so good.
intentionality.
I love that. I mean,
Yeah.
and for people who are, maybe they're not journalers or anything like that, it doesn't have to be a written task.
No.
It just has to be something that is visual to you and consistent. Eventually, our brains are very predictive. You do something enough times and it learns that that's what this particular activity or task means. So for me, I'm typically going to turn on my salt lamp and then turn off the lights in my room. And so that for me means, okay, girl, we are done. That's it. Our brain is officially disconnected from patient work and all the other things. That to me signals I am done at the end of the day. And so that has become more of my own visual cue. I still write notes and all of that, but being a fellow journaler as well, but I realize I have to create a visual shift between my day work and the rest of my life and because I work from home, so I have to kind of create a visual demarcation for me, and I find that works better for me than as well. So I kind of like pair two things together. But again, it's all about finding what actively works for you. So
I love it. I love it. Any final words for our tribe, our Calm in the Chaos tribe?
yeah, I think it's important to recognize like it is any good thing that we do, whether that is a talent we have, a strength that we have, it's great to really highlight that, but it's also really, really important to recognize you are more than just your skill sets. You are more than just your strengths. Like you are a whole human system that is running. And it is really important to be intentional about how you take care of that system. Your system is only going to work as well as you can take care of it, right? You wouldn't expect to, you know, You wouldn't want to drive cross country on a quarter tank of gas. You understand you're not going to get very far. So it's really intentional. You have to be really, really intentional about how you're taking care of your system, because yes, we have great talents and skills, and that's wonderful. But you, as a human, are way more than that. So we really got to honor that by taking care of it.
And I want to share that absorbing stress is a skill that we can restructure, revamp, recalibrate to understand what our resting state is. It doesn't have to be a skill that we execute on a regular basis, because calm does not mean regulated.
Oof, that's a word right there. Legit.
So we want to understand that closing the task does not mean closing the day, which is the backbone to the art of done that we're messaging, right? And sustainability, as far as leadership, requires recovery. I am just tongue tied today. Sustainable relation leadership requires recovery. So that means, to Val's point, and what I'm also wanting to bring for reflection, is the skill set that we have worked so hard to chisel to absorb stress. What does that look like? What does the upgrade of that look like, where it doesn't deplete us?
That's definitely the goal, right? We want to make sure that we are continuing to show up in excellence, right, to the best of our ability, but not to the point where it becomes detrimental to who we are as individuals. And so there's a way to kind of find a better medium between those two elements. And it's about not swinging the pendulum, from one extreme to the other, but about trying to find a space where things can kind of coexist.
For sure. Thank you for joining us for our monthly episode of Calm in the Chaos. My ask is treat yourself as a priority, not only personally, but professionally. You are just as valuable as any project that you lead and champion. So thank you for joining us, and make self-care a priority.
Absolutely. Have a great night, everyone. If you're able to catch the replay, thank you so much for joining us. And be sure to check out our episode with on Projectified with PMI, and we will be sure to put that link down in the description.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.